And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's February the 12th, the 43rd day of this new year. 322 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new one. Holidays and observances. It's Hug Day. Spread comfort and connection and joy. One simple embrace can brighten somebody's day. National Freedom to Marry Day. National Plum Pudding Day. Red Hand Day. Illuminating the plight of young lives ensnared in conflict. Advocating for awareness about the use of child soldiers. Darwin Day. This visionary naturalist revolutionized science with his groundbreaking theory of evolution. Digital Learning Day. Safety Pup Day. Oglethorpe Day. Giving Hearts Day. Georgia Day. If you've never been to the East Coast, never been to Georgia, then there's a lot you don't understand about this country. Georgia Day celebrates the founding of the state of Georgia, honoring its rich history and cultural significance. This special day marks the arrival of the first colonists led by James Oglethorpe in 1733. Time for Georgians to reflect on their state's contribution to American history. I'll just say they got some unusual ideas about the law. Giving Hearts Day, Fat Thursday, NAACP Day, National Lost Penny Day. Scour those couch cushions and nooks. Pennies, since the government no longer makes them, are starting to go up in value. Children's Mental Health Week, National Cardiac Rehabilitation Week, Have a Heart for Chained Dogs Week. If you see a dog chained up in a yard being ignored, that's a dog that needs your attention. National Green Week, National Hero Week, Artes Mundi, International Week of Black Women in the Arts, National Apprenticeship Day, Venice Carnival, Student Volunteering Week, World Ag Expo, National Salute to Veteran Patients, Pickle Time Week, Love of Minch Week, Chastity Week, National Marriage Week, Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Week, Tapati Rapa Nui Festival. Somebody sent me an email on my brand new website asking me what the Tapati Rapa Nui Festival is. It's also known as the Rapa Nui Festival. It's the most exciting and vibrant celebration on Easter Island, held every year in early February. This 2-week period brings the island to life with traditional Polynesian music and dance and thrilling competitions. It's really unique in the world. The festival showcases a deep connection the Rapa Nui people have with their heritage, blending ancient customs with modern influences. Visitors and locals join the festivities, creating a unique atmosphere that buzzes with excitement and pride. If you've never been there, and that's one of the places I have not been to yet, it definitely has a lot of unique features. Love Data Week, Homes for Birds Week, Heart Failure Awareness Week, International Flirting Week. When words fail, playful smile or enticing wink might be just the ticket. National Jello Week, Children of Alcoholics Awareness Week, Great American Pizza Bake, National Secondhand Wardrobe Week, National Kraut and Frankfurter Week, Freelance Writers Appreciation Week, nimble fingers and creative minds, these wordsmiths create content speak to the hearts of readers everywhere. Famous people born on this date: Abraham Lincoln, Josh Brolin, Tony Ferguson, Christina Ricci, and Brett Kavanaugh. Well, on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news on this February the 12th. There's always something going on. Well, Nancy Guthrie's neighbor has weighed in on her disappearance. Investigators found a set of gloves along the road as the search enters its 12th day. Pima County Sheriff's Department, the forensic team seen searching the brush off a road near Nancy Guthrie's house early this morning. Search for the missing 84-year-old mother of NBC host Savannah Guthrie has entered its 12th day. They found a set of gloves near Guthrie's house on Wednesday. Unclear if they match the ones worn by a masked individual seen on the doorbell footage released by the FBI. TMZ founder Harvey Levin told Fox News America's Newsroom on Wednesday that his organization received a third letter claiming to know who Nancy Guthrie's alleged kidnapper is. Former FBI assistant director later said he was highly skeptical of the new letter, arguing bad actors could be trying to capitalize on the situation. One person who looked at the doorbell footage said it appears to them that the individual wearing that mask was a large female. So we'll see what comes of it. Only one House Democrat voted in favor of voter ID, proof of citizenship in U.S. elections. They think anybody in the world who can get to a voting booth ought to be allowed to vote. Now, if it cost them an election, it'd be highly critical of it. They passed, luckily, the House of Representatives, a massive election integrity overhaul bill Wednesday, despite opposition from the vast majority of Democrats. House passed Representative Chip Roy's Save America Act, legislation that aims to keeping non-citizens from voting in U.S. federal elections. And all but one House Democrat, Representative Henry Cuellar, Democrat of Texas, voted against the bill, but it did pass 218 to 213. It's an updated version of the Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility Act, also led by Roy, Republican of Texas, which passed the House in April 2025 but was never taken up by the Senate. And whereas the SAVE Act would create a new federal proof of citizenship mandate in the voter registration process and impose requirements for states to keep their rolls clear of ineligible voters, this updated bill would also require photo ID to vote in any federal election. I mean, let's face it, folks, almost everybody's got a driver's license or some kind of ID card that has their picture on it. One whack job got up and said this was another attempt to keep the minorities from voting. I don't know how they can think that, but somebody's always going to come up with something stupid to say. Well, a federal judge released 4 illegal immigrants convicted of murder and sex crimes from ICE custody. This federal judge was in Louisiana, released 4 illegal immigrants with lengthy rap sheets that include convictions for murder and child sex crimes from law enforcement custody earlier this month. On February 6th, Judge John Gervais, an Obama appointee who sits on the bench for the Middle District Court of Louisiana, granted the 4 defendants release from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement custody. The ramifications only be the continued rape, murder, assault, and robbery of more American victims, according to Assistant DHS Secretary Tricia McLaughlin. Releasing these monsters isn't exclusively reckless. President Trump and Secretary Noem are now enforcing the law and arresting illegal aliens who have no right to be in our country. We're applying the law as written, she added. If an immigration judge finds an illegal alien has no right to be in this country, we're going to remove him, period. The 4 defendants include Ibrahim Ali Mohammed, an Ethiopian citizen convicted of sexual exploitation of a minor. Immigration judge issued him a final order of removal September 5th, 2024. But the Biden administration released him into the U.S. Luis Gaston Sanchez from Cuba has convictions for homicide, assault, resisting an officer, concealing stolen property, and 2 counts of robbery. Immigration judge issued a deportation order for him September 24, 2001. Ricardo Blanco Chomat, also a Cuban citizen, has convictions for homicide, kidnapping, aggravated assault with a firearm, burglary, robbery, larceny, and selling cocaine. He had a deportation order issued against him March 27, 2002. And Francisco Rodriguez Romero was previously convicted of homicide and a weapons offense, ordered to be deported on May 30th, 1995. Unfortunately, God's anointed feel that their belief trumps convictions. Well, an island has cracked down on tourists. The tourists are slapped with new fees, and the fed-up locals found a revolt. Dubbed the Hawaii of Europe, the island of Madeira, about 600 miles from the mainland, Portugal, is known for its volcanic cliffs, stunning waterfalls, and picturesque hiking trails. But anybody who wants to explore the destination's famous walking paths are going to be hit with new fees this year. With the locals fuming over what they call overcrowding and potential environmental damage, fees have now been imposed on non-residents who want to enjoy some of the more popular hiking trails. The stunning archipelago has become a beloved cruise ship destination. The port of Funchal reached 700,000 cruise passengers in 2025. Significant milestone highlights the growing threat of the cruise industry and the growing interest of the cruise industry in the region. That's according to MedCruise, the Association of Mediterranean Cruise Ports. All hikers now need to book a 30-minute time slot in advance through the Simplete platform. Now, residents will need to pay about $5.30 for the use of standard trails. Those trails used through a registered tour operator are carrying a reduced $3.60 fee, according to numerous travel sites, including the Hiking Madeira blog. Residents of Madeira and children under the age of 12 remain exempt from the fees, but they still have to register. The PR1, Madeira's most famous day hiking trail, takes visitors between some of the highest mountains on the island. After renovations to it, access to the trail starting in April will cost about $12.50 for members of the public and $8.30 for those who use the guided tour, according to Hiking Madeira. Well, in 2023, Madeira welcomed 279 ship calls, record-breaking number of passengers. Business was booming, but the trails are harder to enjoy. The question really becomes, is a fee effective for managing the crowds, or is it purely a tourist tax? Sometimes does more than harm than good, according to folks that live there. Well, a transgender ex-student identified as an alleged suspect in the Canada school mass shooting has left 9 people dead. They were killed in connection with the mass shooting Tuesday in Tumbler Ridge Secondary School in British Columbia. Police identified the suspect, reportedly also found dead, as an 18-year-old transgender woman who allegedly killed 2 of her own family members at home before opening fire at the school. Tumbler Ridge Royal Canadian Mounted Police confirmed to Fox News that officers responded to reports of an active shooter at the school at 1:20 p.m. local time on Tuesday. While searching the school, officers found 6 victims dead from gunshot wounds, and the alleged shooter, identified as 18-year-old Jesse Van Rootselaar, dead from what appeared to be a self-inflicted injury. Authorities said Van Rootselaar had attended the school before dropping out about 4 years ago. Identified as female, but was assigned male at birth. Began to transition 6 years ago. Van Rootselaar reportedly had a history of mental health-related contact with police and had access to weapons at home. Police said officials visited the residence multiple times in recent years for mental health calls, in which weapons were briefly seized under the criminal code but later returned after a petition by the lawful owner. Well, that's just shows there's more at issue here than mere mental health issues. Well, Joe Rogan defends a Democratic senator who faced backlash from the party for supporting the voter ID law. Spoke to Dr. Cheryl Hines Tuesday about the risk of going against the grain, citing Senator John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania, as a prime example. Once you get in, for the most part, you have to adhere to the mindset of all the other people that are in your business. And if you don't, you get cast, like John Fetterman, like you get cast out. They hate that guy now. They're mad at him because he says, I think you should probably have ID to vote. Hines, who spoke earlier about the backlash her husband, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., received, agreed, I know, and I like Fetterman. He's great. He's a nice guy. He's authentic. That guy generally worked in charities for his whole life. Generally worked in doing philanthropy work and like real stuff. Like he's not a greedy guy. He walks around in a Carhartt hoodie and shorts. Yes, that's the interesting dress code for a sitting senator. Well, a minivan mom puts Democratic incumbent on notice in a top GOP targeted district. She said she's done nothing for us. Carrie Buck, a Nevada state senator, mother, and former school principal, is gaining massive momentum in a critical race to oust Democratic Representative Dina Titus from what the GOP considers a top target seat in the upcoming midterm elections. Titus's district, Nevada Congressional District 1, has been trending hard toward the GOP for the last several election cycles. And now with the future of the party's House majority on the line and the remainder of President Trump's tenure with it, Buck believes she's just the political outsider Republicans need to seal the deal. In an interview with Fox News, she said the shift in Nevada has been palpable. You can feel the ideas changing, she said. Dina Titus has done nothing for the last 7 terms that she's been in there. Done nothing for us, nothing tangible. So I want to go and deliver results for Nevadans. Well, we've made a lot of trips to Las Vegas. And some of the political ideas that we heard bandied about when we were there were like stepping into the twilight zone. Let's see if she can do anything. When Norwegian Olympian regrets revealing an affair after winning a medal, said wasn't thinking clearly. Norwegian biathlete Sturla Holm Legrid apologized and admitted he regrets confessing to cheating on his ex-girlfriend after winning a bronze medal at the Milan Cortina Olympics. Said, I deeply regret sharing this personal story on what was a day of celebration for Norwegian biathlon. Said in a statement issued by the Norwegian team on Wednesday. I'm not quite myself these days and not thinking clearly. My apologies go to Johan Olav, who deserved all the attention after winning gold. They also go to my ex-girlfriend, who unwillingly ended up in the media spotlight. I hope she's doing well. I can't undo this, and I'll now put it behind me and focus on the Olympics. They go to compete, not to become media stars. Well, President Trump's most important decision is coming up. One door is marked Truman Reagan, the other door is marked Carter, Obama, Biden, and he has to choose one. And this time the choice is going to define Trump's place in history. On 3 different occasions, the 45th and 47th president of the U.S. has walked through the first door. He ordered the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds Force of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, January 3rd, 2020. Followed it up with a second-term order to conduct Operation Midnight Resolve against Iran's nuclear weapons facility in June of last year, and again with Operation Absolute Resolve to snatch Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro in January this year. He's ventured boldly 3 times and won big for the U.S. 3 times, restoring American deterrence along the way. Had to restore America's deterrence in 2020 because the Iranian regime had thoroughly worked over former President Obama with the infamous Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. That was a plan that secured for Iran billions in cash, hundreds of billions in sanctions relief, and a guaranteed path to nuclear weapons. Would have surrendered the Middle East to the mullahs, disguised in dense language and absurd timelines. But the Iranian theocrats knew they'd won. President Trump has called the JCPOA, the worst deal in history, scores at times. Now he's been right. It's the equal of the Munich Agreement between Neville Chamberlain and Hitler. The damage to the world was immense. Then came Joe Biden's disastrous and chronic retreat from Afghanistan. That didn't concern Iran directly, but it did deeply damage America's standing in the world and define the Biden presidency as one mired in catastrophic failure from the jump. President Trump worked to reverse the damage created by the JCPOA, the strikes on Soleimani and the Iranian nuclear facilities. Now, though, the Iranians are countering with thousands of ballistic missiles, which already threaten America's bases across the Middle East, Israel, and our Gulf allies. And the nature of that regime has been fully revealed even to the appeasers on Team Obama and Team Biden. Ayatollahs ordered tens of thousands of their citizens gunned down or murdered with machetes this January. So can you doubt they'd turn their missiles on American cities as soon as they develop the range? Crazed killers are going to kill again and again and again. And unfortunately, they've had the help of American presidents to do it. Well, Zillow data shows buyers are ditching wasted scale for high-efficiency homes as insurance premiums and property taxes soar. What they're calling them McMansions are becoming financial liabilities as buyers ditch these oversized homes. It's moving from a status symbol to a liability. 20 years after the 2006 housing boom, new data from Zillow reveals a fundamental reversal in the American dream. Buyers are ditching the wasted scale and mahogany-heavy footprints for high-efficiency sanctuaries. And as insurance premiums and property taxes soar, real estate experts warn that the oversized, unoptimized estates in the mid-orders are becoming a financial exposure for homeowners who fail to adapt. And quite frankly, I've talked to a lot of people who bought some of these monstrosities who are not happy with their purchases. Well, Trump Religious Liberty Commission boots a member after a contentious anti-Semitic hearing. President Trump's White House Religious Liberty Commission ousted Catholic activist Carrie Prejean Bowler from its membership on Wednesday after a controversial performance at a hearing on anti-Semitism this week. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who chairs the commission, announced Bowler's removal on Wednesday, arguing she'd attempted to hijack Tuesday's public hearing for a political agenda. She was combative during the hearing and defended commentator Candace Owens, who had been accused of anti-Semitism over a number of controversial remarks, among others. Carrie Prejean Bowler has been removed from President Trump's Religious Liberty Commission, Patrick wrote in a statement on X. No member of the commission has the right to hijack a hearing for their own personal political agenda on any issue. This is clearly without question what happened Monday in our hearing on anti-Semitism in America. And this was my decision. And prior to her forced removal, Bowler issued a series of statements refusing to resign her position on Tuesday and Wednesday. Well, she said she had never been knee to the state of Israel, ever. She's a former Miss California. Christians have been manipulated into believing that God blessed bombing, starvation, and mass killings. That's the opposite of Christ, who came to stand with the suffering and confront power. She said, I regret that completely. Well, so she's off the commission. Well, one more story, and then we go to our topic for today. Trump DHS has hammered Democratic governor's portal to track ICE agents, encourages violence. Trump Department of Homeland Security is clamping back at New Jersey Democratic Governor Mikey Sherrill after she pledged to help members of the public track U.S. immigration and customs enforcement officers through an online portal. She's a Navy veteran and recently announced we're going to be standing up a portal so people can upload all their cell videos and alert people. If you see an ICE agent in the street, get your phone out. We want to know about it and start filming them. In response, the DHS spokesperson told Fox News this certainly looks like obstruction of justice to them. This action by the governor encourages violence against our officers and obstruction of our operations, pointing out that all officers are already facing a highly coordinated campaign of violence against them and more than 1,300% increase in assaults against ICE agents. Well, if you can't uphold the law and you're elected to do that, go sell shoes. Well, we've been talking about a number of interesting topics, and I seemed to hit a nerve when I talked about Edgar Cayce the other day. He's the known as a sleeping psychic, and he talked about Atlantis rising from the sea off the coast of Bimini. He made a lot of predictions about upcoming events in the 20th century, declared that Atlantis would rise from the depths in 1968 or 1969. He said this extraordinary event would take place in a part of the Bahamas, the three-island chain of Bimini. That's North Bimini, South Bimini, and East Bimini. That's 50 miles from the east coast of Florida and part of the Bahamas. And a number of people have seen what they believe to be part of Atlantis coming out of the ocean. In the 1930s, as part of Cayce's Atlantis readings, which were actually remarkably consistent, if nothing else, his followers were inclined to take his word, or at least not to search actively for verification. Be some years before some adventurers were curious enough to go looking to find these parts of Atlantis. He said we're going to rise from the sea. And the results will be somewhat disappointing. One sympathetic observer named Paul Johnson summed it up in a sentence. He said, there appears to be no case in which historical information in the readings that was not generally known at the time was subsequently proven to be true. And that, of course, included the readings about Atlantis. Now, from 1960 to the present, explorations of the waters around Bimini have sought evidence for the lost continent. Some searchers, maybe the most vocal of them being David Zink, who photographed them, found a series of large stones positioned in straight lines and with sharp right angles, which they thought were a major archaeological discovery. It was called the Atlantean Road. Zeke actually went on to write a whole book about the subject. Another individual who became what I called an Atlantis chaser was Ivan T. Sanderson, a articulate man trained in zoology and botany and geology at Cambridge University. He became an American citizen in 1947 while still retaining his British citizenship. And until the last decade of his life, he traveled widely collecting animal specimens and writing books about wildlife around the world. He wrote some fascinating books. I've read a number of them. In the 1950s, as a regular guest on TV talk and variety shows, he presented specimens of exotic creatures. And for a time, he was actually a celebrity in the early television age. But there was another, less well-known side to Sanderson. And that would become to dominate his life and career in the last decade and a half of his life. Though his interest in the world's mysterious and controversial phenomena had been sparked, he'd claimed when he attended a lecture by Charles Fort, the influential author of a number of books about anomalies. Now, if you've never read any of Fort's work, I suggest you do it. He came up with some very fascinating information. Early as 1948, in the Saturday Evening Post article, Sanderson proposed that dinosaurs still lived in remote regions of the earth. He'd write one of the first books about linking Sasquatch and the Yeti and other traditions of elusive hominids. Recognized as a pioneer of cryptozoology, that pseudo-proto-science devoted to studying the evidence for unknown, uncatalogued, and certainly extant animals. Closely followed UFO sightings and even conducted investigations in his role as a science correspondent for a newspaper syndicate. He also explored a range of extraordinary claims. These writings combine what you might call thin research with the most extravagant sources of speculations. In one, for example, he contended that ants practice teleportation. Also fell victim to a few outlandish hoaxes, including a 1948 case in which a prankster left giant three-toed tracks on a Florida beach. His own on-site inquiries failed to uncover the fakery, led him to the hypothesis that a giant 15-foot-tall penguin was responsible. That hoaxer confessed in 1988, long after Sanderson was dead and gone. Now, the interesting thing about folks who come forward and claim to have committed various hoaxes, it's just their word. There's usually no evidence. Most of all, though, the chatty, egocentric Sanderson loved to tell stories, however dubious they might be, and spin theories, however woolly, for the sheer pleasure of giving expression to an unfettered imagination. Many of his listeners and readers took him seriously when he was simply being playful quite often. And it's maybe in this context that we ought to consider Sanderson's contention outlined in one of his last books, Invisible Residents, that Earth's oceans harbor technologically advanced civilizations, undetected, needless to point out, by surface-dwelling humans. The book's subtitle is a disquisition upon certain matters maritime and the possibility of intelligent life under the waters of this earth. He coined the faintly comic acronym OINTS, Other Intelligences, is what that stood for. In his conclusion, Sanderson wrote with his characteristically drawl wit that they're for the most part over-civilized and quite mad is, in my opinion, an open-ended question, but quite probable. Naturally, he brought UFOs into the equation, though he preferred UAO, which would mean either unidentified aerial object or unidentified aquatic object. Sanderson allows for UFOs coming from other planetary bodies or more exotic places, but is more interested in ones that represent shared Earth space. Invisible Residents relate sightings of unidentified structures and lights above sea and freshwater bodies on them and beneath them, and then proceeds to recount allegedly mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft in areas that he called vile vortices. Well, vile vortices were an expansion of the notion of the Bermuda Triangle. That's a name invented by the veteran 14-year writer Vincent Gaddis in a 1964 article for the men's adventure magazine Argosy. Though it was Gaddis who put those two words together, he didn't create the idea of unexplained vanishings between the Florida coast and Bermuda. First published piece to allege that the area was haunted and dangerous was an Associated Press account dated September 16, 1950, written by E.V.W. Jones. In Fate magazine in October 1952, Florida writer George X. Sand detailed what he called a series of strange maritime disappearances, each leaving no trace whatsoever, that have taken place in the past few years in a watery triangle bound roughly by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Claim was picked up in 1950 UFO books by Donald E. Kehoe and M.K. Jessup, and Frank Edwards' best-selling and true mysteries collection, Stranger Than Science, which came out in 1959. By the time Gaddis's article appeared, devotees and mysterious had all the pieces together. All they lacked was a name for it. Sanderson's held the Bermuda Triangle was only one of 10 vile vortices, and if you count the polar regions, there are actually 12. These are not actually triangles, but lodging-shaped areas stretching in parallel bands above and below the equator, exactly 72 degrees apart. In these regions, meteorological and oceanic conditions are radically unstable. They actually disrupt the space-time continuum, allowing visitors from elsewhere, other planets, other dimensions, to establish underwater bases. And these oints do not hesitate to take severe measures if they think somebody or something threatens the secrecy with which they surround themselves and their activities. So airplanes and maritime vessels vanish from the face of the ocean, never to be heard from again. Beyond the jokey, over-civilized, and quite mad observation, Sanderson has little more to say about these hypothetical beings, their natures, or their motives. And subsequent research by Larry Kush, Paul Begg, and others effectively discredited the Bermuda Triangle and related legends, which owe more to poor and non-existent research and sinister oints. Overall, there is no evidence that maritime disasters happen any more frequently in these areas than elsewhere. And most of the so-called inexplicable incidents turn out to have well-documented prosaic explanations. But getting back to the Bimini Road, skeptical archaeologist said the stones, while real enough, were not artificially made. They're perfectly natural formation formed by ordinary geological processes, they insisted. In May of 2005, an expedition led by archaeologist William Donato and psychologist Greg Little uncovered artifacts with what appeared to be shaped or manipulated by human hands. They're harshly critical of skeptical claims, arguing the assertions are based on inadequate or non-existent investigation, and beyond that, misrepresentation of the evidence. Hudnall actually theorized the artifacts are from a maritime culture which maybe 4,000 years ago set up a harbor in Bimini. And he said this issue doesn't relate in any way to Edgar Cayce, Atlantis, or any other fantastic claims, notwithstanding the fact that Hudnall and his wife Laura's long membership in the ARE and involvement in New Age thought, but in fact needs to be viewed in the context of ongoing controversies over the early dates for the people of the Americas. What's been discovered about the ancient past in the Americas since 1997, according to Hudnall, has almost completely altered the history that had been accepted since the 1930s. Might well be revolutionary archaeological discoveries that await further documentation in the waters off Bimini, but validation of Cayce's Atlantis teachings is certainly an unlikely prospect. You know, over the course of a long career as an editor and writer, Ray Palmer mastered the art of huckstering mystification, as it's been called. He hawked outlandish claims, often having to do with the hollow earth lore. I've read a number of his writings. Man had quite an imagination. In 1959, he was editing the small circulation magazine Flying Saucers out of Amherst, Wisconsin. And he received 2 review copies of a Vanity Press book titled Worlds Beyond the Poles, written by an obscure theorist and crank named F. Amato Giannani. He championed the unique notion that the Earth is more or less spindle-shaped. The universe is not a vast near emptiness, he argued, but an immense landscape of physical continuity. We think our galaxies and stars and planets are in truth globular and isolated areas of continuous and unbroken outer sky surface. And all this came together, he wrote, in what one assumes to have been an unintentional effort to make already dubious notions even less believable. In a vision he experienced while strolling through a New England forest one day in 1926. And even Giannini acknowledged his concept that the Earth and the universe's shape can't be visualized except psychically. Well, both the author and the book would have faded even deeper into obscurity from which they emerged if Palmer hadn't found something in the volume to get his more excitable readers wound up. Giannini had a new wrinkle on the myth of polar openings into the inner Earth. And it turns out there is a factual support for the fact there are polar openings, though what's in them is anybody's guess. But what he found turned out to be no less than the celebrated aviator and polar explorer Admiral Richard E. Byrd had entered such an opening while on an expedition to the North Pole in 1947. That was all during Operation High Jump. He also thought the same had happened on a South Pole expedition in January 1956. In December 1959 issue, Palmer took this story but failed to credit Giannini for or hold him responsible for it, asserting he had learned this extraordinary secret after years of research. In his research, Palmer wrote what had passed for a straight face. It uncovered contemporary reports from the New York Times in which Byrd mentioned seeing ice-free lakes and lush green forest and mountains and a giant unknown animal, apparently a prehistoric mammoth, in a land 1,700 miles beyond the North Pole. These unexpected sights alerted him to the presence of an undiscovered land beneath the frozen polar region. In 1956, Byrd also allegedly flew 2,300 miles beyond the South Pole. Palmer asserted all this is well authenticated. At both poles exist unknown and vast land areas not in the least uninhabitable, extending for distances which can only be called tremendous because they encompass an area bigger than any known continental area. Well, not all readers, of course, chose to be wowed by this revelation. A number wrote Palmer to point out the small consideration in February and March 1947 Byrd was at the South, not the North Pole. That's true. Operation High Jump was conducted at the South Pole. Moreover, as they determined easily, the Times had reported nothing about forests and mysterious beasts at the pole. Palmer's forced to concede that rather than having researched them on his own, he had taken these claims directly from Giannini. After a brief bow to the merely factual, though, he was off on a new and even more exotic tangent. According to what Palmer wrote in his editorial in February 1960 issue of Flying Saucers, now as to the how of our serious era, some time ago he made a remark that there was a systematic effort being made to render the whole flying saucer story ridiculous. We promised to make this a particular point of attack in the future and name names and present facts. That time, though, hadn't come yet. We could only say that we haven't changed our mind about this effort. And now at the publication of the December issue and our claims in it, we're more certain than ever. In short, what we want to say is that our statement that Byrd made a North Pole flight in 47 to 1,700 miles beyond it was a fishing expedition, for which we hope our readers will pardon us. Yes, people such as Palmer don't make mistakes. They always have a logical reason for what they say and do, no matter how crazy it might sound. Well, Palmer's nudge and wink twaddle would have left a little mark outside the yellowing pages of old, modestly circulated flying saucer issues if not for the fact, and it is just about the only fact of the whole business, in the 1970s, a retired Marine Corps officer, Tawani Sush, also a member of the Modoc tribe, had not produced a remarkable document. Sush, that's Shoush, a Missouri man, headed something called the International Society for a Complete Earth. Because the organization sported a swastika logo and insisted that inner-earthers or Nordic outsiders maybe couldn't be blamed for drawing the unflattering conclusions the group's political alliances might be pro-Nazi. But Schuss insisted he and his associates did not advocate Nazism, though not everybody believed him. They did, however, hope to sail the dirigible into the North Pole hole, which they'd go meet the good folks who called the interior home. According to what he told the Chicago Tribune columnist Bob Greene in 1978, he held the hollow earth is better than our own world. We can only speculate what we'll feel like coming back. Well, as you might guess, that expedition never happened. Just as well, given the potentially fatal consequences to which serious misreadings of geography can lead, the confused and the organization hadn't been heard from in years. It did, however, make a lasting contribution to fringe literature with a monograph it sold. This monograph purported to be the secret diary of Admiral Byrd from his supposed 1947 North Pole expedition. Now, nothing about this document is remotely believable, starting with the absurdly overwrought prose, but which bears no resemblance to the erudite language the real Byrd used in his real writings. I got a chance to see some of his writings from his niece, Cynthia Byrd. I knew her when I was in elementary school. As you might guess, that was quite a number of years ago. The prose reads exactly like ineptly executed Pulp Fiction, which, of course, is precisely what it is. In any event, this bogus diary chronicles a flight starting in the morning of February 19, 1947. At 10 a.m., 4 hours later, according to what was written in the monograph, we're crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center of it. Now, there should be no green valley below. Something's definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side, a great forest growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. Well, the plane descended to 1,000 feet. Byrd and radio man lose sight of the sun. They see a mammoth and soon after green rolling hills. Then at 10:30, Byrd lets flies with some exclamation points. Ahead we spot what seems to be a city. Now this is impossible. Aircraft seem light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft, and they're closing rapidly alongside. They're dish-shaped and have a radiant quality to them, close enough now to see the markings on them. It's a type of swastika. This is fantastic. They couldn't figure out where they were or what had happened. And Byrd said he tugged at the controls again. They still wouldn't respond. They're caught in an invisible vice grip of some type. And minutes later, a voice speaks through the radio in a slight Scandinavian or German accent. It welcomes the admiral to his domain, promises to land his plane in exactly 7 minutes. Aircraft is no longer under the crew's control. Within the promised period, it descends and lands gently. Well, he said he was making a hasty last entry in the flight log. Several men are approaching on foot toward the aircraft, and they're tall with blonde hair. In the distance is a large, shining, shimmering city pulsating with rainbow hues of color. An allusion to another staple of the Hollow Earth literature, the Rainbow City. Byrd said he didn't know what's going on or what's happening. Doesn't see signs of weapons in those approaching. And he said he heard a voice ordering him by name to open the cargo door, which he did. And assuredly pointless to observe that if all this happened in real life, Byrd would have been too preoccupied to be writing in his diary, and of course taking extra time to dot his sentences with all those exclamation points. Well, the rest of the story is reconstructed from memory, according to what Byrd later wrote. He said the two explorers step aboard a platform without wheels and speed toward a glowing crystal city. They were taken to a big building out of a Buck Rogers setting. After consuming a warm and tasty beverage, unlike any which they are familiar, he sees two men approach. They separate him from his companion and lead him a short distance to an elevator that descends to another floor. Walk down a long hallway until they reach a great doorway, and it's opened up. One of the men says, "Have no fear, Admiral. You're to have an audience with the master." Well, the story in the so-called Byrd brief is quite interesting. I've read segments of it over the years. The diary ends with a coda dated December 30th, 1956, with the observation, if I faithfully kept this matter secret as directed all these years, been completely against my values of moral right, secret won't die with me. I've seen that land beyond the pole, that center of the great unknown. Well, this document is firmly ensconced in Hollow Earth literature. At least one writer speculated Admiral Byrd's weird flight was a secret inspiration for the International Geophysical Year, proposed for 1947, though not declared till a decade later. Of course, not all Hollow Earth advocates apparently have been fooled. For example, Dennis Crenshaw, editor of the Hollow Earth Insider, has remarked that the master's words are unsettlingly like those uttered by the Dalai Lama of Shangri-La in the 1937 film Lost Horizon. Crenshaw doesn't hide his suspicion that Tawani Seuss and his associates forged the document. Unfortunately, not content with that well enough alone, Crenshaw himself sailed off into a fantasy land, charging on no invisible evidence that the Gianni's family owned the Bank of Italy and the Bank of America. And the Illuminati and the New World Order, John D. Rockefeller and his pals, financed Byrd's polar expeditions in the service of a vast cover-up. Well, in 1947, Operation High Jump was a military expedition. The war had just ended, and why a major invasion of the South Pole was undertaken is anybody's guess. Well, in looking at some of what was written, specifically the Rainbow City information, the origins of that Rainbow City go back millions of years to a long-forgotten time when the human race conquered and colonized worlds in the Milky Way galaxy and dozens of other galaxies. Eventually, the humans encountered their nemesis, the race called the Snake People. Ensuing conflict dragged on inconclusively for 1,000 years, till at last events turned decisively in the snake's direction. Well, the ancient humans were virtually destroyed, chased through space by vengeful snakes, till finally ancestors found a few backwater worlds in which to hide and lick wounds. And among these planets was Mars, which sheltered the humans for a long time. But the planet began to lose its oxygen, and the great ruler dispatched an exploratory fleet to the neighboring world, the third from the sun, what we know as Earth. As you go through some of the more outlandish literature, a lot of absolutely fantastic imaginations came together to write all this. You know, in the latter half of the 19th century, press accounts highlighted observations of what they called the Silent City. Now, the Silent City was a mysterious presence supposedly encountered, usually in the summer, usually between June 21st and July 10th, in the sky over the Bimini Glacier, 150 miles north of Juneau, Alaska. And dubious-looking photos of it, or something similar, allegedly seen along the Yukon-Alaska border, were printed and sold as postcards. Now, the latter are widely judged to be fakes, but the sightings comprise something of a historical meteorological enigma. In the late 1890s, the Juneau Times featured the testimony of a miner identified as George Cayce. This article was reprinted in other newspapers all over North America. He said, "I think I'm the first white man ever gazed on the frozen city of the North." Now, he didn't mean the mirage. He insisted he had seen the original city 2 years earlier while in northern Alaska on his way to a prospecting trip to the Yukon Territory. According to his story, at one point the party, traveling on the river, arrived at a fork. He wanted to go one way and the rest of the people wanted to go the other, so he set off on his own after hiring 2 American Indian guides. Weeks later, the 3 reached the foot of a mountain range where they set up camp for the winter. Soon the really cold weather set in, sometimes with winds so bitter the campers didn't dare leave their immediate location. One day, while the temperature was relatively mild, Cayce suggested to do something interesting, such as scale a nearby mountain. When one of the guides expressed interest, they embarked along the frozen river, followed it for 20 miles till they reached their destination. Then, according to the story, they reached a plateau between the foothills and a high range. Here the stream ended, and they started to climb one of the big hills. After a lot of hard work, they reached a point near the summit. A wonderful view was had from here, but the strangest thing was the city in one of the valleys. Well, according to Cayce, at first he thought it was some fantastic arrangement of ice and snow that had assumed the form of a city, but examination with a glass showed that such was not the case. It was far too regular in appearance. It was a city, sure enough. Determined to see more of it, he commenced to work downward. After several hours of hard work, he reached the outskirts of this mysterious city, found this place was laid out in streets with blocks of strange-looking buildings, what appeared to be mosques and towers and ports, and every evidence of having been built by art. Now, the whole was of solid ice, or seemed to be, but blows from a hatchet on one of the walls disclosed the fact that underneath the barrier of ice was some sort of building material. It looked like wood, but of stone-like hardness and apparently petrified. Well, he said the place was silent, in fact, somewhat ghostly. Not the slightest sound broke the awful stillness of the place, which, added to the weird look of the empty streets, made it gruesome enough. He soon got tired of investigating the city, as the streets were blocked in many places with huge masses of ice, rendering passage almost impossible. And his companion also became uneasy, and they started on a return trip, reached the camp the next day, tired but satisfied they had been the first men to gaze on that silent city for centuries. Well, in an 1895 issue of the New York Sun, noted at least half a dozen white men professed to have seen that city, while the natives of the Alaska coast cherished the tradition of its existence. One witness, John White, declared he saw it on June 21st some years before. He declared he studied the mirage for 9 hours through a powerful glass as it was spread above the glacier on the side of Mount Fairweather. He affirms the city was walled, its houses are battlement, and the chimneys surmounted by chimney pots. Then the walls are tall monuments surrounded by the sculptured figure of an Indian in full headdress and feathers. And he said his glass revealed to him some of the inhabitants, men in knee breeches and jackets. The only beast visible was a donkey-like creature with a body as large as that of a horse. Well, this mirage appeared at first about 11:30 in the morning as a mist. Out of this rose the towers and battlements of the city, as did those of ancient Troy. By noon, the city was as clearly outlined as New York is from the Jersey Heights. Well, there's been a lot of stories coming out of Alaska about strange things that were seen. An 1897 expedition explored the wilderness near Mount St. Elias. Its members reported a vivid mirage above a glacier. One member, C.W. Thornton, wrote it required no effort of imagination to like it to a city. It was so distant that it required instead faith to believe it was not in reality a city. Clearly visible for half an hour and then slowly faded away, leaving a rocky ridge in its place. The Silent City, as it's been called, is little heard of these days, except as an example of a mirage-generated legend. Be interesting to see if, in fact, there's something to it. Well, on their return, I'm talking about Admiral Byrd. The visitors informed the ruler they'd found a pleasant, fertile place that would sustain human life. Some thousands sailed from Mars to Earth, going back to the story about the snake people fighting with the early humans. Well, many of these stories just won't die. And if you read more into it, many of the stories take a tangent off into the hollow earth, which is a theory that's been around for hundreds of years. I read a lot of material about, in fact, there was some Norwegian and his father and son actually sailed into the hollow earth in their ship and stayed for a year or two and then came back and talked about the wonderful people they met. You have to wonder about why won't the stories die? Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. The next topic I'm going to start is a little bit too long in the next couple of minutes we have left. If you want to read some more about the strange world of the inner earth, I refer you to the magazine Amazing Stories. There are reprints available, and there's been a number of books written on things that are in Amazing Stories. Richard Shaver told remarkable stories about his alleged subterranean adventures in a series of wild tales. One of his cohorts came on my show when I was doing one out of California. He had some interesting stories to tell. But until tomorrow at this time, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.